Welcome and thank you for watching another current event update. My name is Marco, pastor Community Church of Devore, and thank you for being with us. We've all heard of tariffs and what's going on with the tariffs, and if you listen to the Western media, it's all the fault of the U.S. and specifically one man. Simply put, I believe all of that is propaganda, but all seem to be worried about tariffs and what China's doing, what the South China Sea is going to become, what Vietnam's doing, what this other country's going to do, what Asia's going to do, what Europe's going to do. And of course, there's only two countries that are still not in favor of even making a new deal with the United States, and that is China and Canada. Now, they just had an election, so make that as you will. While other 50 nations are willing to make a deal, these are the only two holding out. I believe we'll know soon if these reciprocal tariffs, by the way, are going to work, or they're going to bring some kind of balance to the global trade order, or will they have more of the same, the CCP controlling a one-sided deal. Now, we know Chinese factories right now are getting wiped out in these tariff wars. Containers are down halfway, are cut down by half. Factories are laying off about half of the workers or shutting down completely. One analyst says this is worse than the lockdown years of 2020. China needs a new deal, by the way. China's debt in the non-financial corporate sector is about $26.5 trillion. So non-financial corporate sector, their debt is $26.5 trillion. And most of that debt, or all of that debt, has been serviced by trade to other countries. So if there's no trade, that debt will either continue to grow or not be paid at all. But instead of focusing on tariffs today, I want to talk about something more troubling. That is the population collapsing all over the world. It seems few people are concerned about this, and it's a glaring problem, and is going to affect the world going forward. Birth rates, fertility rates, aging population, all those fertility rate and the birth rates are imploding, leading away to, of course, an aging population in many countries. Well below, by the way, these fertility rate is well below the 2.1 replacement rate. While most of them are talking about overpopulation and how to curb overpopulation and the measures to curb the growth of population, while telling young people not to get married or delay marriage or not have children in order to fight climate change, in order to save Mother Earth. The reality is we have a low population, low birth rate, low fertility rate, excess mortality and disability, especially the last 5 years. It's going to impact the world for decades. The sad reality is that many nations are going to lose millions of people over the next few decades. I did a video in August of 2023, you can see the link below, that explains more or less the population problems around the world. One specific problem we targeted was China, and things have not improved around the world. Certain nations are still trying to incentivize families and marriages, like in Eastern Europe and even China. But is it a little too late? Lone voices like Elon Musk are the only few that have been vocal about the population collapse, the declined birth rate, and the alarming replacement rate, which goes together. But that's for a different video. Here we have a video of Elon Musk speaking about the low birth rate.
Well, there's a lot of things that I suppose that I worry about, but and some of these things will seem esoteric to people. The birth rate is very low in almost every country, and it's something, unless that changes, civilization will disappear. America had the lowest birth rate, I believe, ever. That was last year. Places like Korea, the birth rate is 1/3 replacement rate. So that means in 3 generations, Korea will be 3 or 4% of its current size. And nothing seems to be turning that around. Humanity is dying. It's very basic that if people stop having, if there are no babies, if people stop having babies, humanity will come to a halt. We've seen now for many years very low birth rates in almost all of the world. So even India recently went below replacement rate. So sometimes people will say, well, we'll just replace people with immigration. Like, immigration from where? If you look at China, for example, they are roughly at half replacement rate. I think maybe it's 60% or something like that. So that means, call it something like 600 million people will be lost of this generation. Where are you going to get 600 million immigrants? That would require almost 2 Americas to move to China. That's impossible. If you look at Korea, Korea has a replacement, the birth rate is now 1/3 replacement rate. That means in 3 generations, Korea, the size of the Korean population will be about 3 to 4% of what it currently is. And basically, Korea will disappear. And I think that there are great things in every culture. We don't want the German culture to disappear. We don't want French culture to disappear. We don't want Korean culture to disappear, or Japan, or America, or anywhere. I think this is part of why I'm like, I think we should be very cautious about having some sort of global mixing pot, because we will then not have, every place will be the same, and there won't be any unique cultures in the world, which I think would make the world worse.
A very significant thing happened in 2022. For the first time in 300 years, China ceased being the world's most populous country. Ever since the era of the Qin dynasty, which is about the year 1700s, China has been the home of the world's largest population. And ever since 1951, where they stopped the internal and constant war, China began to grow and expand. They had a baby boom after the Civil War of 1949, so very similar to the US baby boom and the post-war Europe. But now, according to official Chinese data, for the first time in 60 years, Chinese population marked a decline. This hasn't happened since the Great Chinese Famine of 1960 and 1961, when they lost tens of millions to a terrible famine, which was, of course, propagated by their own government. The population of China is primed to a decrease every single year over the next decades. This is going to profoundly impact their influence around the world. India has emerged as the world's most populous country. And for the rest of the century, India seems primed to be the most populous country in the world, and they continue to grow as China declines. India's population is projected to be about 1.6 to 1.7 billion people by 2060. By 2050, China is going to lose about 200 to 300 million people as the aged population continues to increase. In 60 to 70 years, China's population could be about 700 to 800 million people. This is the quickest decline of any civilization in human history, half the size of India by the beginning of next century. Some of the reasons: it's low birth rate, aging society, marriage rates declining. They took a plunge, sharper than even during the lockdown years. No weddings, no babies, aging society. It's a demographic time bomb. And as they say, demographic is destiny. Of course, it weakens their influence in global affairs. And the situation since my last video in China has become worse. In fact, the fertility rate is now about 1. Some say 1.1, some say 1, but it's around there. So what does the CCP do when this happens? Well, like many other times, they take measures to hide the data. This has led to, by the way, very viral videos, a lot of viral videos on the internet talking about population of China not being what it is. And the government has been secretly lying about the population. Now, officially, China's population is about 1.4 billion people. That is what is reported. But is it true? Is the CCP lying about this population? And what is the purpose of trying to hide something that the whole world is going through? But it does make sense, and I'll show you in a bit. I want to dispel one rumor. It's a sensationalized rumor, is that China has actually lost 1 billion people. That actually, they only have 300 to 400 million people now in China, so roughly about the size of the United States. Where did all the billion people go? 1 billion people missing. Well, I think people are posting all kinds of videos on YouTube, usually bots in the comments linking you to another video. Is that really true that China lost 1 billion people, or were they never there to begin with? Now, I don't think China's lost 1 billion people. I think they're underreporting for sure, but not 1 billion people. A CCP data leak in 2022 said the population of China was around 1.28, 1.29 billion people, about 110 million less than what they report now. But is that even accurate? Now, the CCP data has always been corrupt. There's never been true gathering of data. They always hide the information. What experts realistically say, and what they conclude, is that China's population is about 1.1 to 1.3 billion people. That's not too bad. People say, oh, it's 1.4. What's the difference? If it's 1.4 reported and you have 1.1 to 1.3, that's not a lot of people. Well, in reality, it's about 200 to as many as 400 million people underreported, meaning that the CCP is reporting higher numbers than what there actually are. China is not reporting real numbers. somewhere between the population on the low end of Japan and on the high end, the US. And if you take the average, it's probably the population of Brazil that are missing from their reporting. Imagine that your reporting is so bad, your numbers are so skewed that you don't reflect whole nations like Japan or the size of Russia's population or Brazil's population. Missing that many people is just crazy. But why don't they report it? Right? Why would they report higher numbers than what they actually are? Well, China's local governments are so dependent on money, and the CCP central government dishes out all this money that they decide who gets the money and who doesn't. A lot of times through bribery, kickbacks, favoritism, and other interesting standards, including the number of people in your area. Now, there's a huge income gap, by the way, huge income gap between cities and rural areas. Most villages and towns in China are relatively poor, and they need as much money as possible from their central government. But these local leaders are also corrupt. It goes back to the days of Mao, where he favors certain areas if they did certain things for him. It is imperative for these local leaders to get as much money as they can for, I don't know, a new car, a new house, I don't know, a new mistress, new position in power. It is imperative to get as much money as they can. So if they can add a couple thousand people to their data that don't exist to get more money, they will. So you tell the central government they have more people than you actually do, and you get more money. Now, if you multiply that by thousands and thousands of villages all across China, that's a lot of people that don't really exist. And not only are they lying about the rural population, but the rural populations in China are experiencing a decline. Rural areas would oftentimes offset the urban area, especially with the one-child China policy, that it was in the urban areas, they had one child. In the rural areas, they had more children. But that's not the case anymore. In fact, the rural areas are dropping faster than urban areas. Plus, the depopulation of rural areas, it's a phenomenon that not a lot of people know about. You ever heard of ghost cities? Especially in areas that are next to other nations. So border towns are extremely depopulated. Now, what are the ramifications? On a national level, the CCP is incentivized to over-report because they can brag about being the most populous nation. Different statuses in global organizations when it comes to climate change, zero carbon initiatives, climate change goals, they're being met by a higher population and they have lower output of CO2 per capita. You name it, they get all the accolades. They claim 1.4 billion people, but in reality, it's probably like 1.1, maybe 1.2. China wants to be the leader in climate change initiatives, and they can pass global legislations with the WEF, with the UN, through the Paris Accord. Now, some reporters have exposed this, and this is very interesting. China reported that in 2016, they had a baby boom. But when they looked at the number of those children that were born in 2016, when they enrolled in school, there weren't as many kids. So what happened? They also claimed that they only lost 83,000 people during the lockdown years, around 2020 to 2024. But that's just incredible. Only 83,000 people at the epicenter of the whole thing. Chinese studies have revealed, accidentally, by the way, I would tell you, that they estimate the death of citizens during those years is between 2 to 8 million people. Now, that's a huge range, but you can see how the data is skewed. But you can at least see that it's not 83,000 people. That's amazing if you only think 83,000 people died during that time. Did you know that Chinese Google, which is Baidu, which is a search engine, the searches, you can track the searches of funeral homes and funeral urns compared to the baseline searches, same terms, over the past few years, and compared to the death numbers of those years. And you can see why the numbers reported are just wrong. Because what you have is a tremendous amount of searches in funeral homes and funeral urns, and you compare it to the number of deaths, and it doesn't make any sense. So you don't search for funeral homes or funeral urns unless you need them. Now, what is the problem? The problem is the future. So all these things the CCP is hiding, data, not reporting, over-reporting. Sometimes they underreport minority groups. But they cannot hide their future. China has one of the lowest birth rates in the world. It's about 6.3 per thousand, and the fertility rate is about a 1.0 to 1.1, well below the 2.1 replacement rate that you need. Very similar to Korea, which is below 1. I think it's like 0.75. Japan is just barely over 1. Higher than Hong Kong, which is 0.8. By the US is about 1.6. Just for context, Europe is about 1.4 to 1.5. The UK is about the same, maybe a little bit less, maybe a little bit more, depending on the numbers. The Western world is not doing so well either. Now, this indicates that women are, on average, having about one child per person. And it's driven by urbanizations. They live in the cities. It's very, very expensive. People, youth can't get jobs. Youth unemployment is very high. The cultural shifts. A lot of young people don't want to get married. They're told not to get married. They're incentivized not to get married. And like I said, far below the 2.1 replacement rate. Now, one interesting thing, in China, while the main ethnic group, the Hans, are experiencing a decline, minority groups are not. It actually, minority groups have increased. And by the way, the numbers could be higher, but many times the CCP data underreports. That's what I mean by underreporting some and overreporting others. And this doesn't bode well for minority groups, which have been treated, let's say, not so well by the CCP, especially in Western China. But the CCP now have stopped reporting numbers of non-Hans groups. So we really don't know, and we can never really get the exact numbers of what those non-minority groups are really like. But in the past, they were increasing. So the CCP is willing to sacrifice population growth for the sake of ethnic dominance? Well, China is in trouble. The economy is in trouble. The economy is in the toilet. 100 million of elderly that need caring, and they need to be taken care of in the future by children and young people that do not exist. China has little to no social programs, by the way. Even though they boast about being a communist country, they don't have many social programs for elderly. The CCP has tremendous problems, and they're lying about their birth rate, and they're lying about their fertility rate, and they're lying about their age population. And this is just a demographic time bomb. The CCP has been an enemy to many nations. And this is reported by Europe, Asia, America, from viruses, blaming other nations for it, hacking US and Europe infrastructures, technology, paying billions to sow discord and dissent around the world, including America, claiming other nations for themselves, preparing for invasions, destroying world's economies, even to their own citizens, establishing social credit scores, CBDCs, punishing not having the right CBDC or the right digital yuan, punishing having citizens not having the right social score, surveillance states, re-education camps, remember those in the 60s and 70s, destroying the lives of many, imprisoning minority groups, especially in Western China, concentration camps, even in recent times, and I can go on and on and on. But one of the worst things the CCP has done is the persecution of God's people. Christians have been very, very and severely persecuted by the Communist Party ever since the 40s and 50s, even before then. No one knows really how many Christians are in China. The underground churches have grown. They're just not reporting because even the CCP cannot even report how many Christians there really are. The CCP has made a deal with the last Pope Francis, but to clamp down on religion, to clamp down on Catholic churches, on Christian churches. This deal was done with the Vatican. They changed the Bible. Everything has to be done according to the CCP, surveillance and control of Christians who are forced to register, churches are forced to register. The Lord Jesus is going to deal with the CCP and their godlessness and what they have done to his people. The CCP has also been quietly helping fund terrorism in the Middle East with their Belt and Road initiatives, deals with Iran, supporting Iran by buying their oil, and that money that is used to fund terrorism comes from China, Syria, the support of Syria, and they've been power brokers in the Middle East, and they want to be the power brokers in the Middle East in dealing with Israel and Palestine, and this has led to supporting of nations that would love to destroy the Jewish people. For all that, God's hand is against the CCP and their godless government. So one question that keeps coming up all the time is, what does this mean? Is China in Bible prophecy or not? It's been a puzzle to many Bible teachers, and many of them have proposed different ideas about China's involvement in the end times, in the last week of Daniel, the 70th week of Daniel. Revelation 16 is one puzzle, or one piece of the puzzle that teachers present. Is China Does China have a military role in Armageddon? The kings of the East, chapter 16, verses 12 to 16. And that theory is that the kings of the East is the army that comes from China and that marches toward Israel, toward the valley of Jezreel and the battle of Armageddon at the end of the 7th year. And you can see the passage here. Some link to the ancient trade routes like the Silk Road or the China's Belt Initiative, suggesting that this is going to be the logistic capacity for the kings of the East to go into Israel, to go into the valley of Jezreel. Now, as China's global power and military expansion continues, prophecy teachers believe that this is a possibility. Revelation 9 is another possibility, the 200 million man army. Some say this is Chinese, though I believe it's a demonic army of the Antichrist. Some prophecy teachers believe that there's only one nation that can really arm 200 million people, and that is China. Hal Lindsey promoted this idea, not only Revelation 16, Revelation 9. Many people have follow his lead on that. And basically, it describes a modern military technology, they say. So the description of the demonic army, they say it's John's description of modern technology, tanks and missiles and all that. Now, I don't know if that is true. It doesn't seem possible to me that is a Chinese army. Well, what about Isaiah 49? Isaiah 49 in the land of Shinim. They see it as a spiritual and migratory role. Now, in Isaiah 49, verse 12, it says that there will be people that come as far from the west, from the east, from the north, and from the land of Shinim. Some scholars associate Shinim with China. They think it sounds the same etymologically, suggesting that China has some kind of role in the restoration or conflict. Now, this is, of course, this chapter emphasizes God's covenant with Israel. It's part of the servant songs of Isaiah, toward the end of Isaiah. And it's, of course, the Messiah, Jesus, and in the inclusion of salvation of Gentiles as well as Israel. Now, the land of Shinim, in Hebrew, it's Eretz Shinim. It's Hapex Logemenon, meaning that it's the only appearance in the Bible. And so the identification is very debatable whether this is China or not. Now, the verse describes people coming from afar off, even from this land, and it is indicating a global gathering. Now, this, I believe, is during the millennium, people coming from far away, including China, that will come to Jerusalem to worship the Lord and serve Jesus during this time. But I don't think it's indicating a role, China's role during the 70th week of Daniel. I think it'll take place later than that. Now, some people see China as a peripheral alliance of Ezekiel 38 and 39, meaning this describing the alliance with China and Russia and Turkey in Iran, and that they would come in to the land of Israel, just like it's described in Ezekiel 38, 39. Some see it as Daniel 11:44, news from the east. The Antichrist will receive news from the east, and it will cause him to be troubled and go back into Jerusalem. And some have interpreted that this is Chinese resistance against the Antichrist. Others see it as a benevolent movement, back to Jerusalem movement, which is a Christian missionary movement fulfilling the Great Commission. Unlike coming into Israel as an army attacking Israel, they see it as a 200 million man Christian army in a sense of missionaries that Chinese believers will go into, despite the persecution, into Jerusalem and share the gospel from China all the way to Jerusalem, fulfilling Revelation's call to all nations. The gospel will go to all the nations, and then the end will come. Now, this is it's very popular among missiologists, Eugene Bach, in the Back to Jerusalem movement, and rather than prophecy teachers who don't see China in that role as a missionary alliance, rather more they see it as a more nefarious and more military invasion of Israel. So where is this going? When nations diminish this rapidly, especially, they become desperate to hang on to power and the influence that they want to keep while they still can. Sheer numbers and sheer power is what they want to hang on to. And China is trying to hang on to the fact that they still have the numbers militarily and they have the manpower to manufacture things. Maybe Taiwan is in the horizon. Beijing is realizing this and is beginning to act like it in the South China Sea, toward the Philippines, towards Japan, toward South Korea. Most analysts believe that the window of time for China to exert this much pressure and influence in the world, in the South China Sea, is coming to an end. and it's quickly coming to an end by the 2030s, early to mid 2030s. So it's either soon or never at all. And you can be looking at things to be happening in Taiwan, in the South China Sea in the next 5 to 8 years, or not at all, because they just simply won't have the numbers. We'll have to wait and see. In the meantime, we need to pray for believers in China. We need to pray that they'll be able to be a powerful witness to their generation. We need to pray that God will give them the grace and the courage to stand against their godless government, to love and win their enemies to Christ, and that the Lord Jesus may have mercy on China before he comes. And as you think through all of this, I want to leave you with something from another transhumanist. This is Larry Fink from BlackRock, and what he has to say about the declining population of robotics and AI replacing humanity.
I could argue in the developed countries, the big winners are countries that have shrinking populations. Okay, that's something that most people never talked about. You know, we always used to think shrinking population is a cause for negative growth. But in my conversations with the leadership of these large developed countries that have xenophobic immigration policies, they don't allow anybody to come in, shrinking unemployment, shrinking demographics, these countries will rapidly develop robotics and AI and technology. And if the promise, I didn't say it's going to happen, but if the promise of all that transforms productivity, which most of us think it will, we'll be able to elevate the standard of living of countries and the standard of living of individuals, even with shrinking populations. And so the paradigm of negative population growth is going to be changing. And the social problems that one will have in substituting humans for machines is going to be far easier in those countries that have declining populations.
Of course, he never talks about or never addresses the current debt situation accumulated by these countries, which will be addressed by currency devaluation, which the CCP has done. But he mentions that certain countries that have lost people, have a low fertility rate, will have to be augmented by AI and robotics. I believe only major economies will actually fit that bill. China, Japan, South Korea. Could the population decline lead to an augmentation of AI and robotics in the future? Well, you be the judge. Thanks for watching. Watch and pray every single day. Read God's word and get God's word into you. We thank you for watching. Until next time, may the Lord richly bless you and Jesus.